Good morning. I welcome the oral examination board members, Dr. Brahma Prakash and Dr. Balaji, for the PhD Viva of Amanda. And we have 15 people joining us in this online for the Viva. Now, I will make a small presentation about the title of the thesis. It is Analysis of Farmer Resilience Towards Climate Variability and Extremes in the Most Vulnerable Areas in Lower Velar Subbasin. And this particular thesis was evaluated by two examiners. Can you go to that slide? It was examined by Dr. G.B. Brahma Prakash, Professor, Department of Agricultural Microbiology, University of Agriculture Sciences, Bangalore. He was the Indian examiner. The foreign examiner was Professor Nandi Bolan, Global Center for Environmental Remediation, the University of Newcastle, Australia. And based on their comments, the thesis were corrected, and then it was approved by the doctoral committee. And the university approved the oral board for this thing. And today we have the oral examination board members, Dr. G.B. Brahma Prakash and Dr. Balaji Narasimhan, Professor, Department of Civil Engineering, Indian Institute of Technology. These two members will be evaluating Amanda for her oral presentation. Now, Amanda will be making her presentation. We have a small agenda and about the scholar. Amanda is currently a teaching fellow at Center for Water Resources. She did her BE Agriculture and Irrigation Engineering in the year 2006 to 2010. She belongs to the first batch of agricultural and irrigation engineers. And later she did her master's in Integrated Water Resources Management. She is a SAVA fellow, and she was also a gold medalist in her master's thesis, master's program. And she registered for her PhD in January 2014 as a part-time scholar, when she is also continuing as a teaching fellow. And she has done her work, and today she's going to defend her thesis. The next slide. So this Viva was examination, starts with a small introduction, which I've just finished. Then it is followed by the presentation of research findings by Amanda. This will be followed by questions by the oral examination board members. And it will be open for questions from the participants also. Then there is a closing remarks and vote of thanks. So this is this thing, and Amanda will make about 20 to 25 minutes she will take for the presentation. And now I ask Amanda to continue with her presentation. Yes. என்ன அன்மியூட் பண்ணிட்டீங்களா? இங்கே தானே இருக்கு.
Good morning, everybody. I would like to briefly present the findings of the research. So, extreme climate events. So, when we hear of this term, we are able to remember some of the deadly disasters during our lifetime. Events such as floods, tropical cyclones, droughts, landslides, heat waves, wildfires, etc. Such events have caused a lot of damage to human life, livelihood, human property. It also affects the different sectors like agriculture, the industrial sector, fisheries, etc. It is said that the agriculture is the most impacted sector because of such extreme climate events. Around 26% of the impacts are on the agriculture sector. So the analysis of extreme climate events, the occurrence of extreme climate events, and how we can overcome, how the farmers can overcome the impacts of such extreme climate events is the need of the hour. So keeping this as a focal area or the focal point of research, I have chosen the study area as Velar River Basin. So there are 7 subbasins in the study area, and I've chosen the Lower Velar River Subbasin for further analysis. The reason why I have chosen this subbasin is because this subbasin is predominantly under agriculture. It has around 5 districts, and it covers 5 districts, with Kadalur being the major district, and around 77.6% of the area is under agriculture. Paddy and sugarcane are the major crops grown in the subbasin, and both are require a lot of water for its production, making the farmers highly dependent on the monsoon. So this table gives agroclimatic season in the study area. So they have the kharif season, the rabi season, and the summer season. And we can see that the monthly rainfall during the the seasonal rainfall during the northeast monsoon season is around 654 mm. So this sub-basin is highly dependent on the northeast monsoon for its water requirement. So for identifying the research problem and formulating the objectives, the following steps were done. First, field visit was done and a rapid rural appraisal was taken up, and then visual analysis of the secondary data collected was done, from which the research problem was identified. It was found that most of the farmers were facing flooding issues during the monsoon period, and they were facing drought kind of issues during the non-monsoon season. And also the data showed that the rainfall in the sub-basin was quite high, and a number of flood events had occurred in the sub-basin. A number of tropical cyclones had affected the sub-basin. Cuddalore has also been classified as a disaster-prone area by the government of Tamil Nadu. And one peculiar thing to be noted is that most of the tropical cyclones forming in the Bay of Bengal, they make their landfall in the Cuddalore district. So they are more prone to floods and damages due to cyclones. So based on this, objectives were formulated. So the first objective is to analyze the trends of extreme temperature and precipitation indices in the sub-basin, followed by which a vulnerability index was developed, and the different regions within the sub-basin were given ranks. In the most vulnerable region, the farmer resilience was calculated using the farmer resilience index. And using the farmer resilience index, guidelines for developing adaptation strategies were suggested. So the methodology I followed is given here. This is what I explained just now. So we'll move on to the results. So for each objective, I have given the results in the consequent slides. So for the first objective, I had calculated the indices. So the ECCR SCI indices had been calculated using the ClimePact software. So the data was first quality controlled, and then homogeneity testing was done, and then the indices were calculated. So all this was done using ClimePact and RHTest in our program. And then the data series or the time series was it was regionally averaged using this method from literature. The regionally averaged data series was then used for trend analysis. The Mann-Kendall trend test was used, and the sensor estimator was used for estimating the slope. If the autocorrelation errors were present in the data series, the Durbin-Watson test statistic was used for detecting the autocorrelation errors from the residuals obtained from the regression analysis. If autocorrelation existed, the Hamid and Rao method for correcting the autocorrelation was used. So all these steps were carried out using ExcelStat software. So first, I would like to present the results for the extreme precipitation indices. So 7 rain gauge stations were selected for the study. The data was from 1978 to 2015. Only these 7 stations had continuous data, and the missing data was quite less. And they fall within the sub-basin, so that was the reason I had chosen all these 7 stations. And during the homogeneity assessment, 2 stations were non-homogeneous, so I corrected and I homogeneized the data series using the quantile matching algorithm. And these are the precipitation indices which have been calculated by the ClimePact software. So these are the results for the annual trend. You can see I have highlighted the significant trends using bold font, but here you can see there are no significant trends. But one thing to be noted is that indices such as R95P, R99P, 1-day precipitation, 3-day precipitation, and 5-day precipitation, these indices have shown insignificant positive trends. So though there is no significant trends, we can see that there are occurrences. There have been occurrences of extreme or intense precipitation events during the assessment period. These are the results for the monthly trends. Here also there are not much significant trend values. Mostly the trends are insignificant except for a few. So the analysis are done using considering the agroclimatic season. So first, if we consider the Kharif season from June to September or October, we can see that the trends mostly they are negative, which means the rainfall which we get from the southwest monsoon has highly reduced. And when we move on to the Rabi season, that is in November and December and Jan, we can see that here the trends are positive. Though they are insignificant, we can see that the events have intense, extreme or intense precipitation events have increased in the subbasin during the time period of analysis. And one thing we can see here is that there are negative trends during December. So we can see that the amount of rainfall which we get from the northeast monsoon season during December has highly reduced. And we can see that most of the tropical cyclones or depressions which bring rainfall to the subbasin, it occurs between November and maybe the first week of December. Next is the result of the trends of extreme temperature indices. So I had obtained the data, temperature data from IMD, and the data was between 1969 to 2005. It was gridded data, and two grids fall within the subbasins. I've chosen both the grids, and these are the indices calculated by the ClimeFact software. So these are the results of the annual trends. So the most of the trends are insignificant. There are no significant trends. But we can see that there are predominantly warming insignificant trends in the subbasin, and in the coastal, the first grid is the interior grid, and the second grid is the grid near the coast. So in the coastal grid, we can see that minimum temperature related indices are having a cooling trend. So these are the results for the monthly trends. I have put the table for the agroclimatic season. So this is for the Kharif season, this is for the Rabi season, and this is for the summer season. All the three seasons have a similar pattern. The interior grid has a warming trend, and the coastal grid also has a warming trend, except for the indices related to the minimum temperature. The minimum temperatures have been reducing over the time period of analysis. And we can see that when compared to precipitation indices, temperature indices have a number of significant trend values. The second objective is to construct a composite vulnerability index with the iterations from the ClimeFact software obtained from the first objective, and to provide vulnerability ranks for the different regions within the study area. So I had followed the methodology suggested by the Central Research Institute for Dryland Agriculture, Hyderabad. So 7 blocks have been chosen for analysis. These 7 blocks were chosen because agriculture was predominantly carried out in those blocks. The nearby blocks like Tammapuram, etc., they actually cover the Neyveli Lignite Corporation. So I did not want to choose that and include them in the analysis. So I chose only the blocks where agriculture was predominantly carried out. And also they contribute a major share in the percentage of subbasin area. So the blocks were Mangalore, Nallur, Virudachalam, Kataminar Koil, Mel Bhuvanagiri, Keerapalayam, and Parangipete. So 36 indicators have been used for assessing the vulnerability, of which 15 were adopted from literature and 21 has been proposed by the researcher. Of the 21 indicators, 8 indicators are based on the data availability, and 13 indicators have been modified from the existing literature. So the indicators have been classified into sensitivity indicators, exposure indicators, and adaptive capacity indicators. These indicators are, I've explained the indicators with respect to the precipitation extremes. There are 2 composite indices within the vulnerability index. So we have the cyclone proneness index and available water holding capacity index. Both are composite indices, and I have calculated them separately. So for cyclone proneness index, I have referred literature, and I have come up with the index. So these are the parameters for calculating the cyclone proneness index: the number of cyclones, the total number of severe cyclones, the probable maximum winds, probable maximum storm surge, and probable maximum precipitation. So these are the categories for the different ratings obtained. So I've obtained the rating for the different blocks, and I've also categorized them based on the rating values. The second composite index is available water holding capacity. So I have collected the data for the percentage of different soil types in the blocks from the agriculture department in Kadalur, and I had obtained available water holding capacity for the different types of soil from literature, and I had arrived at the total available water holding capacity for the different blocks. So using all these values and also the data for the different indices, for the different indicators, I have developed the vulnerability index. So first, I normalized all the data since data is of different units and in different scales, so I normalized them. And then the vulnerability index was calculated using this equation. The different indicators have different weights. So there are 36 indicators, so it is quite a tedious process to determine the weights of each indicator, or we cannot give equal weights. So the principal component analysis was done for determining the weights of each indicator. The first principal component was chosen such that the eigenvalue was greater than 1, and also the percentage of variance was a greater value.
Okay.
The PCA was done using FAST software, and there are different variants of the vulnerability index computed: the sensitivity index, the adaptive capacity index, the exposure index for the 2011-15, and also for the future projected data, and then the vulnerability overall vulnerability index with respect to precipitation extremes and temperature extremes. The reason why I had chosen 2011 and 15 was because 2011 was the year when Cyclone Thane had affected the Kadalur district, and 2015 was the year when there was excessive rainfall due to a depression in the Bay of Bengal. And 2025 to 55 is the mid-century. It is the projected data obtained. So I had categorized the blocks based on the vulnerability index. This categorization was obtained from literature. So these are the results for the sensitivity index. So the sensitivity index clearly shows that the coastal blocks such as Virudhachalam, Kattumannar-Koil, Kirapalayam, Melbhuvanagiri, and Parangipete are highly sensitive to climate extremes. These are the results for the adaptive capacity index. Again, we can see that the coastal blocks have very poor adaptive capacities when compared to the interior blocks. Then the exposure index during 2011 and 2015. So we can see that in 2011, almost all the blocks were highly exposed to the tropical cyclonic event. During 2015, we can see that the coastal blocks were more vulnerable to flooding, and they were more exposed to the climatic event. So for the projected climate, I had obtained the downscaled data from Hadley Regional Model. I had obtained it from the Climate Change Department in our university. So 4 grid points were it actually falls within the subbasin. So I had chosen all the 4 grid points, and I had used a linear scaling approach for bias correction of the data, and it was done using CMI software. The percentage bias before and after correction was also calculated. So the exposure index shows that there is medium exposure in the mid-century. So only when the adaptive capacities of the people or the farmers in the subbasin is improved, will they be able to overcome the vulnerability, will they be able to overcome the impacts of such climate extremes? If there is no improvement in the adaptive capacities, considering this exposure, surely the farmers will be facing a huge impact. So the vulnerability index, the overall vulnerability index has been calculated for all the blocks for the year 2011, 15, and also for the mid-century. So the overall vulnerability index shows that the coastal blocks, Parangipete, Kirapalayam, Melbhuvanagiri, and Kattumannar-Koil are highly vulnerable, whereas the interior blocks were less vulnerable. The vulnerability index was also calculated related to the extreme temperature indices. So I had modified some of the indicators, and I have calculated the vulnerability related with respect to the temperature extremes. Again, we can see that the coastal regions have a higher vulnerability index value when compared to the interior blocks. The next objective is to measure the farmers' resilience in the most vulnerable blocks. So from the previous results, we can see that Parangipete is the most vulnerable block. So I chosen Parangipete for further analysis for measuring the farmer resilience. So this FRI is based on the Climate Disaster Resilience Index framed for Chennai City by Jonas. It was obtained from literature. So this index has dimensions, indicators, and sub-indicators. So I have consider 4 dimensions: economic, social, technical, and physical. So these are the dimensions, and they have been explained with respect to flood, cyclone, or a related disaster. So the study area, Padalipete block has around 47 villages. So I had chosen 5 villages through random sampling methodology. So these are the 5 villages: Chinnakomatti, Kothattai, Ariyakoshti, Silambimangalam, and Villanallur. Using cluster sampling methodology, I had chosen 2 villages as primary sampling units. So they were Silambimangalam and Chinnakomatti. Before choosing these 2 villages, I had gone for a field visit to all the 5 villages, and I found out that there were some issues going on between NGO people and the farmers in the village. So they were actually very hostile towards me. They were not ready to allow me inside the village. So that was also a main reason why I had to leave out the other 3 villages and only choose Silambimangalam and Chinnakomatti. And from these 2 villages, I chose the secondary sampling unit using simple random sampling. So 5% sample size was fixed based on expert opinion. So Silambimangalam, I will be referring that as village 1 and Chinnakomatti as village 2. So Silambimangalam is close to the coast and Chinnakomatti is around 7 kilometers interior. So these are some of the details of the 2 villages. The number of households in Silambimangalam is around 1,500 and the Chinnakomatti has around approximately 500 households. So 70 households from Silambimangalam and 23 households from Chinnakomatti were interviewed. So the questionnaire was developed considering the different dimensions, parameters, and variables, and they were administered to the respondents. They were given a choice between 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest score and 5 being the highest score. So I had used the Likert scale for analysis, and dimension-wise, PCA was done for fixing the weight for each variable. So again, PCA was done using FAST software, and also the first principal component was chosen with eigenvalue greater than 1 and a higher percentage of variance. So dimension-wise resilience index was calculated, and then the overall farmer resilience index was calculated. The analysis was done based on the land holding, and the categorization of the farmer resilience index was low, medium, or high. So these are the quantitative results of the analysis. So village 1, it showed a higher resilience when compared to village 2, but both the villages had a resilience between 0.5, 0.6, or a maximum of 0.7. So both the villages were said to have like average resilience overall. When we consider the land holdings of the farmers, you can see that the marginal or small farmers, they have a lesser farmer resilience index value when compared to the medium farmers. There were no large farmers among the population which I had sampled and surveyed. So medium farmers were only there in the village, both the villages, and their resilience was comparatively higher when compared to the marginal or small farmers. The correlation between the variables based on land classification shows that the rich farmers, the rich farmers have a larger land holdings. They had access to different resources like internet, electricity. They had better income and other such things. This spider diagram also shows the index, the farmer resilience index based on the land holding. So we can see that the medium farmers, as shown in the yellow line, they have a better resilience when compared to the marginal farmers, which is indicated by the purple line. The physical resilience index was actually found to be very high among all the dimension-wise indices. It also was found out that the farmers, the medium farmers, they had a better physical resilience index when compared to the small or the medium farmers. So some of the qualitative analysis of the results or the qualitative observations which I obtained from the questionnaire survey was that there was a caste system and class system prevailing in both the communities. The poor or the low caste people, they had very less land holdings, and their lands were in a lower region. Whereas the high caste people or the higher class people, they had their lands in the upper place. They call it as a mode. So what happens is during an extreme event, the people who have the land in the lower areas, they have water stagnation issues, and they say that water stagnates for a minimum of 15 days if there is a heavy downpour. If there's one event, one extreme precipitation event, they have 15 days of water stagnation, and they don't have proper drainage facilities. They don't have access to the field. Whereas the upper caste or the high or the rich people who have larger land holdings, there they have access to roads and uh, other things. And also the farmer business organizations. There was a farmer-based organization in one of the villages in Chinnapamatti. It was a month old, and the head of the FBO was a person from the higher caste, and he was well-to-do, and he had a large land holding also. So such things were still prevalent in both the communities. Access to credit insurance was also another issue. It was said that the bank issues insurance only like to 100 farmers. So what happens is they inform the most influential or the rich farmer, and what happens is that farmer informs only to his friends, only to people in his caste. So only the first 100 farmers are accessible to the insurance. If any new scheme comes up, only they are aware. The other poor farmers, they don't have access to such credits or insurance or any new thing. And also there was inequality when agriculture extension services were given. I had visited and had conducted a face-to-face interview with KVK in Virudhachalam. So they provide extension services to the communities in Parangipete. So what they do is they also have contact with only a few influential farmers, and they tell them about any training program. And those farmers only bring 10 or 15 of their own friends. The other farmers from other communities or castes, they don't have access to such extension services. And they also don't prefer coming to such, the low caste people, they don't prefer coming to such training programs. They're very reserved. They don't come for such activities. And also, when I had spoken with the training with the KVK, the professor from KVK, she told me that they did not have any exclusive awareness program related to extreme climate events or climate change. And also, illiteracy was actually very prevalent among the farmers in both the communities. So, based on this, I had suggested some. Or I've just given some suggestions for developing adaptation methods for improving the resilience of the farmers and making them able to overcome the impact of climate extremes in future. So crop insurance, the schemes can be changed and the accessibility to crop insurance can be improved. The farmer-based organizations, the structure needs to be changed. Formal access to formal extension services needs to be equal. It should be all the farmers should be included. Access to climate and weather information. Poor farmers, they don't have smartphones, whereas rich farmers, they have smartphones and they're able to install the application. The government provided application, and also TNA has also come up with applications. So they install those applications. They're accessible to weather and climate information. Whereas poor farmers who don't have access to a smartphone, they don't have such facilities. And knowledge of the different climate adaptation methods. Awareness of field drainage infrastructure is lacking in for most of the farmers. Even the farmers are not aware of the term climate change. When I translate the term climate change and I tell them in Tamil, they don't even know. They're not aware of climate change. All they can tell is that NLC is causing issues. Because of NLC, we don't get rain. So they are not aware of climate change. So I think that is one important thing to be noted when we come up with policy level changes or when we come up with providing extension or awareness to farmers. So to summarize the presentation, the precipitation in the past has shown mostly insignificant trends, but during the northeast monsoon, we have seen there has been an increasing insignificant trend. During the summer, there has been a decreasing or no trend, and similarly for the southwest monsoon, there has been a decreasing trend. The temperature trends have shown a significant warming trend, and the coastal areas have shown a decrease in the minimum temperature, the T minimum, and the coastal regions have found out to be more vulnerable to precipitation extremes and temperature extremes. They also have poor adaptive capacity when compared to the interior areas or interior villages, and the farmers in the coastal region or in the coastal areas, they have only average resilience towards climate change or climate extremes. Their social, physical, or technical resilience is very less. It is less than 0.5. And also, the land holdings play a very major role in determining the resilience of the farmers. So, some of the conclusions from the study is that there are increased occurrences of wet summers and flooding during the monsoon season in a warm climate. The coastal regions have been highly affected by climate extremes, especially because of occurrence of high-intensity tropical cyclones and depressions, along with increased maximum temperatures. And there has also been a link between ENSO and the northeast monsoon season with intense precipitation, especially during 2015. It was a record high. There were record high events which had taken place in Kadalur district. And also, it has been found out that agriculture is highly sensitive to any changes in climate. And in the study area, agriculture was highly affected by such extreme climatic events. The resilience of the farmers is very average, and only when their resilience is improved will they be able to overcome the impacts of the climate extremes or extreme climatic events in future. So some of the recommendations are to improve the literacy rate by educating women, children, providing credits for field drainage infrastructure, providing crop insurance to all farmers, making changes in the crop insurance schemes to benefit farmers, developing self-help groups managed by women for farm extension services and credit borrowing, access to good roads and electricity supply for farmlands, making the farmers aware of more of climate resistant or flood or drought resistant varieties. And sustainable cropping systems can be coupled with the conventional methods the farmers follow in order to sustain yields during such climate events, because farmers are not ready to give up their conventional methods. So we can couple them with the sustainable cropping systems. And also the government can take steps to, the government and even education institutions can take steps to use applications to convey climate information and other weather-related information to all the farmers. Farmer extension services can be provided to all the farmers. So these are some of the references which I've used for preparing this presentation. So these are some of the journal publications. I've published one paper and 2 papers are under review. And I've also attended a short course on climate change and food security in 2010. Thank you.
Turning on the microphone.
It's on, ma'am.
Okay, right. Thank you, Amanda, for the presentation. Now I request the oral examination board members to ask questions to Amanda if there are any. You have to ask Balaji sir or
Professor Balaji, you please ask the questions first.
Okay.
I think Brahmaprakash, Professor Brahmaprakash, you can probably start asking the question because you might have evaluated the thesis in detail. So I think you please go ahead and then ask the question.
He only said Balaji, please ask. Yeah. You have to unmute.
Amanda, you have recommended role of educational institutions in improving the farmers' resilience. Can you just elaborate on that? That is one of your recommendations. Can
you repeat your question, sir?
One of your recommendations is role of educational institutions in enhancing the farmer resilience in these areas. How the educational institutions can play a role in enhancing the farmers' resilience?
I had visited KVK. KVK is a part of TNAU. So there were a couple of... There were professors from TNAU who were in KVK, and they were actually involved in this farm extension activities. So when we improve that and make sure that we include climate change or climate extremes and such topics also during these such extension activities, I think farmers will become more aware.
But the KVKs and other the institutions cannot be categorized as educational institutions. They are farmer-related services. It is their job. When you say educational institutions, a college or a university will come into the picture. That needs to be modified or something has to be done to convey the meaning properly. I think
Okay.
that's about it. Professor Balaji, to you.
Amanda, a lot of field work, lot of surveys, lot of assessment, practically looking at, the issues related to farmers. So I'd like to congratulate you on that. But specifically, if I just look at the conclusions and recommendations, if you can go back to the slide, can you say, how the PhD thesis that you have carried out resulted in some of those conclusions? And for example, let us say if this was not your PhD thesis, would we have come up with the same conclusions and recommendations? Was there any new knowledge addition that has arisen out of your thesis? That's something that I was not able to immediately recognize from your presentation. So I was trying to look at through your conclusions and recommendations. For example, let us say if this was not a PhD work, whether would we have still come up with the same set of conclusions and recommendations? I'm just trying to look and see what was the value addition that your PhD thesis actually brought about in this whole assessment.
One of the main problems which I identified in the particular study area was flooding during heavy or intense precipitation events. These events are very short and say for like half an hour or 15 minutes, they have a heavy downpour in the study area. And they have severe waterlogging issues. So when we talk about adaptation methods or other such things, we generally tend to say you modify the crops or modifying the way we cultivate the crops, the cropping pattern and other such things. But the issue was the location of the field, the availability of drainage infrastructure. We generally tend to generalize something and we give it for a particular block or a district. But when we focus on small communities, we are able to identify such unique problems to those individual communities. Only when we go and analyze or do research at a community level, we are able to identify the issues from the farmers. I was able to identify these specific issues in these two communities. So in these two communities, if I had not done PhD, I might have generally given suggestions saying like shift to drought, drought tolerant crops, or go for organic farming, go for mulching, or something like that. But only when I went to the field and I found out the real problem faced by the farmers, there was a lack of drainage facility for the farmers who had their lands their lands at a lower elevation. So the only option for them to prevent waterlogging in the field was to provide good drainage facilities. They are actually not aware of, at least in these two communities, they were not aware of good drainage infrastructure, and they were not given any awareness also by the government or other KVK or any other organization for that matter. So,
Amanda?
yes,
Yeah.
sir.
See, Amanda, I understand that there's lot of information, lot of interaction at the field level to gather the ground realities. My question was, for example, let us say you have carried out the study in Velar. Now, let us say if I repeat the same study elsewhere, would that qualify? Whether are there new things that you have done in this particular study? Whether can I generalize that to come up with some sort of a hypothesis, a sort of a thing in other places? So, for example, let us say if I repeat the same study elsewhere, then I will find some other thing. I'm just trying to look and see, how does that actually bring in any new additional information or new knowledge or new concepts that we test out in the field. So typically in the when we look at when we see the PhD, there should be some new additional knowledge or new additional concepts that we try to bring over. So I'm just trying to extract what was the new additional knowledge or new additional information or new concepts that you actually formulated as part of your work that can probably that holds value to actually apply to some other place. So if I just do the traditional survey and then if I do the traditional information assessment, so that will be more like data analysis, right? So I'm just trying to look and see what is the new additional concept that you brought about, new value addition that your thesis has brought about. That, for example, let us say if I apply, that can be applied to some other place where we have very limited understanding of some of the. That's what I'm just trying to get at. Because otherwise, if it is the same addition, then we are talking about. I'm just trying to look and see if there is a new knowledge that has been added, new concept that you have probably developed that justifies the doctoral work, right? Because if you look and see, there are a lot of field work, lot of studies are there. I'm just trying to look and see, how that merits the doctoral work, so that can probably be applied elsewhere. So that's what I'm just trying to understand from your work.
So the index which I've calculated, the Farmer Resilience Index, is something new. It is the equation and the methodology was completely new, and it was formulated by myself and my supervisor. And all the indices, it was actually developed by me. The Farmer Resilience Index is exclusive for rural communities, and that can be applied to any other rural community also. There are existing indices for urban areas like cities or other areas, but there is no exclusive resilience index for rural communities. So that is something which I have developed on my own, and the methodology, the equation, everything has been developed on my own.
I wish that your thesis actually, your presentation focused more on that. See, when I was listening to your presentation, and then you said that I developed some of these new indicators, I was hoping to actually hear more about it and why your indicators are unique. You understand? So why not other indicators, and why these indicators? I would have probably liked to see how other indicators are not able to bring out the vulnerability that the coastal community is facing, and how this indicator is actually a better indicator. So I would have expected a lot more in-depth statistical analysis, by comparison of the existing traditional index vis-a-vis the new index, and how the new index is able to vividly bring about the vulnerability. You understand? So, I mean, I also feel that's where the new additional contribution is. But hopefully, you might work on some publications and things like that. Hopefully, if it actually can bring out some of those additional things, that's where I see a lot of new value additions that are there. Maybe you might need to do some in-depth statistical analysis to compare the traditional indices versus some of the new indices that you propose, because you said that there are some 13 additional indicators. You evaluated some 21 indicators, and there are some 13 additional indicators that you brought about related to some cyclone and there are several
Yes,
things
sir.
that you basically proposed. So I personally would have liked to see a lot more in-depth analysis on some of, because that's where the new knowledge addition is, right? So the rest of the other things are all the traditional statistical analysis and other things, but then that's where you are trying to bring in something new, where you have made a value addition by contributing to a new set of knowledge. The rest of the other things are all, the general thing in terms of what every other regular study would have carried out. The uniqueness that you brought about is actually in that aspect of it. So I would have really liked that point of it to have come about, both in your thesis as well as in your presentation. Maybe you can just try and see if you can, try to, because I'm sure that you have all the data and other things that you need to carry out such a thing. Maybe this is something that's can probably work towards a publication that would probably bring about that aspect of it in a much more vivid way, because I feel that that is a stronger contribution. Right? Okay. That's all, Professor Ambrujam. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Now, as both the oral experts have finished their questions, if there are any questions from the participants of this Viva, there are about 30 of us here. I think I would allow about 3 people to ask questions, or if there are more, let us have more also, but at least 3. You can unmute and then ask questions. I think everybody is muted now. Is anybody? Sir, you have a question? Sir? No? Any questions from participants, please? Unmute. Please unmute. I think it is Madhavi Ganesan. Yeah? Is there a question? Or you can ask in the chat box also. If you can unmute your mic, then we'll be able to hear you. I think so far nobody has come forward to ask any questions and clarifications. I think, yeah, please. Mudgal wants to ask questions. Yes.
Yeah, Amanda, thank you for the presentation. Now, in this adaptation studies, have you used any climate models for future predictions? And when you are looking at adaptation strategies, how does the future scenario models that have been predicted be used in your studies? Because I think you have taken only the coastal region as a study area. So how can this be used, like as Professor Balaji was asking, to another study area?
The future data I had obtained from regionally downscaled model, pressing model data only I had used. I was able to obtain only for the mid-century from 2035 to 2055. For 30 years period, for a 30-year period only I was able to obtain. And for the next question, can you repeat the question?
No, because your study area was the coastal region.
Yes, sir.
Supposing, can you use your, let's say, outcome to another study area, let's say, which is the hinterland?
The indices which I have used, it can be used for any other basin, sub-basin also, sir. It is not exclusive for the coastal region. We can modify one or two parameters in the index and we can apply that for different regions, because I have included some parameters like distance from the coastline and other such indicators in the vulnerability index. So maybe such parameters can be excluded, and then the index can be calculated again for a region which is further away from the coast.
Because your study area is coastal area, cyclone is one of the things that you have considered. But if you take interior region, probably drought would be one of the important things. So whether that has been considered, drought has been considered.
I have not included drought as a parameter in the vulnerability index, but I have considered the temperature extreme related indices. But I have not considered the occurrences of drought. We can include a parameter on the number of droughts occurred, the severity of the drought. Such things can be included in the indicators and again recalculated.
Professor Ambujam Balaji here.
Yes, Professor Balaji.
Yeah. See, you had, I think, in some of the slides where when you presented, I think in one of the slides, if I recall, I think you had risk plus vulnerability minus adaptive capacity or something like that, right? I think you had calculated something. I'm not sure if it is such a linear addition that is possible, because you are ending up with some negative values. I mean, what is the physical meaning of this negative value? What do you can you generalize that? I mean, how do you come up with such negative values? Typically, when we say risk, vulnerability, and things like that, they will range from 0 to 1. But then now you have brought in this adaptive capacity into that equation, and then you are doing that, and then it has a negative value there. So now, how do we? How do you interpret that? And can that interpretation be generalized across several basins? Any basins?
I had referred literature, and from the literature only I had adapted the methodology, sir. The equation is not simple as given in the slide. That was just for a basic understanding. I had put up that equation. But I have actually given the rationale for the different indicators. So here I have given the rationale. High values means increased low value means increased. So for each indicator, the rationale actually varies, and also the equation I have given here. Here, the equation, it gives, there are two sets of equations depending upon the relationship of the dimension. The indicator value, if they have a direct relationship with the dimension, I use this equation. If they have a inverse relationship, I use the another equation. So for each indicator, I had to check the relationship of the indicator with the dimension, and then only I included the value in the equation. Either it was positive or negative. In the thesis, I have actually given the inverse and the direct relationship for the different variables. I've given a separate table where it shows either it has a direct relationship or an inverse relationship. All the direct relationship variables were summed up. All the inverse relationship variables were subtracted. So it was actually sensitive plus exposure plus adaptive capacity. The indicators were either positive or negative. All the positives were summed up. The negatives were again subtracted. And from that only I derived the value. Either it was positive or it was negative. It was actually, this methodology was obtained from literature.
Okay. And this PCA was done for each and every individual district separately, or what was your spatial unit for you to do this PCA?
Block. For each block, the PCA I had done block-wise. I had done, sir.
Okay.
For each block, I had done the principal component analysis and included the weights.
Okay, but then what is your rationale for actually weighing that based on your principal component weights? Your weights primarily comes from your principal component. Why are you trying to do the weighing based on the principal component on the different indices? I mean, what do you expect to find from this? Because each PCA is basically going to give you the, the first PCA is basically going to give you the maximum variability and followed by all the lower variabilities basically. But then why are you again doing this summation here? What is this new additional information that you are going to get over there other than how the individual factors are weighed into that PCA? I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here, right? Because your PCA, essentially, wouldn't it, when you actually weigh it based on your individual thing, wouldn't it actually give back the same, the PCA one or whatever that one is, or the entire thing, because you are again summing it up based on your the weights for the PCA? Because the PCA, if you actually take a look at the PCA 1, PCA 2, PCA 3 and things like that, each PCA you are going to have a certain contribution that's going to come from first variable, second variable, third variable, and things like that, right? So you have that thing. Now you are taking that weight, right? So that is given for the PCA, right? And then you are trying to add that up. So if you actually look at it, each of the variable will be weighted differently for different PCAs.
Yes,
right. For PCA 1, it will have a different weight. For PCA 2, it will have a different weight. So my this one is, when you do this simple summation, won't you just end up with PCA 1? Whatever the PCA 1 that it basically gives you, whatever that you are calling as vulnerability index, isn't it actually PCA 1 is what my question is. Because if you basically take the weights of the PCA 1 for that particular variable and then just sum them up, you will probably get PCA 1 essentially. What you are calling as vulnerability index is essentially your PCA 1, isn't it?
So, but the indicator values for each block varies. So, and also the PCA for each block, I have done the analysis I have done separately. So the weight for each block will vary, and also the indicator values.
For each block it will be varying. But then when you add all of them together, won't you just get the PCA 1? That's what my this one is. If I understand correct, if you will probably get PCA 1. So you are just summing it up once again, the weights you are taking, and then you are simply multiplying it with the normalized indicator value. In fact, the PCA is coming from your normalized indicator value only, right? If I understand it correct. Yeah. Yes, so now, by doing this, essentially you are again calculating back PCA 1, isn't it? Yes, just try to go back and then check your thing. So I just think that it would end up giving you the PCA 1 value, right? You just go back and check on it.
Yes.
So is this something that you are proposing, or it is there in some literature somewhere?
Already, this is already existing in the literature, sir. The Central Institute of for Dryland Agriculture, they have actually come up with this atlas on vulnerability of Indian agriculture. They have done the same, they have used the same methodology for determining the vulnerabilities district-wise.
Okay.
They had used the same methodology. They had actually used the PCA for determining the weights, and then they multiplied it with the normalized variable to get the index value district-wise, state-wise. I'm sorry. So I had adopted that methodology for calculating the vulnerability index.
Is it published anywhere? Is it published in a peer-reviewed article, or is it there as part of a report or something? Do you know?
It's a kind of a report published by the institute. It is not a journal paper. It is a report, 100 or 150 page report they have actually come up with for the entire country.
Just check and see. My.
Hello.
Summing it up. Were able to hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Just check and see. I think my hunch is that probably you will get the PCA one back probably when you do that summation.
Yes, sir.
Professor Ram Prakash.
Yes, ma'am.
And Balaji, do we have any more questions or?
No, I do not have any more questions.
Okay.
No, I don't have any more questions.
Okay. So I think Professor Mudgal asked Amanda a question, and there is nobody else asking. In that case, can we conclude the meeting by Balaji and Prakash? If you agree,
Yes,
we can tell that Amanda has successfully completed her PhD Viva examination.
Professor Ramprakash, I wholeheartedly recommend awarding the degree for Amanda, and congratulations to Amanda for successful completion of the Viva. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Professor Balaji.
Thank you.
And I thank everyone who joined this Viva examination and for listening to the presentation of Viva and the examination questions raised by the two examiners. Now, as per our this thing, we can conclude the meeting. And I take this opportunity to congratulate Amanda for the hard work that she has done. And she deserves a PhD. And we will wish her all the best.
All the best.
Thank you.
All the best.
Congratulations, Amanda.
Amanda, congratulations. All the best.
Hey,
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All the best, Amanda. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations, Amanda. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
So now
I thank
Professor Ram Prakash and Professor Balaji for conducting the examination. Although it is online. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ramprakash. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, madam. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.